The Fall of Dhaka, 16th of December 1971. Anatomy of a military and political collapse. The fall of Dhaka on 16th of December 1971 was not a sudden battlefield accident, not merely the result of Indian military intervention. It was the terminal point of a long chain of structural failures, political arrogance, and demographic denial. Military miscalculation, strategic isolation, and moral collapse. What occurred at the racecourse ground that afternoon was not just a surrender of arms, but the public disintegration of Pakistan's founding contradictions. Bangladesh was not created that day by foreign armies, it emerged because Pakistan had already destroyed itself in the east. To understand the fall of Dhaka, one must move beyond battlefield maps and dig deeper into the mechanics of power, legitimacy, consent, geography, logistics, as well as time. Chapter 1: The structural impossibility of Pakistan in the East. From its birth in 1947, Pakistan was an artificial construct. Two wings separated by 1600 kilometers of hostile Indian territory, bound by bound not by geography or economy, but by an abstract religious identity. East Pakistan contained the majority of Pakistan's population, yet remained politically, economically, and militarily subordinate to the Western Wing. Despite contributing to the bulk of Pakistan's export earning primarily through jute, East, East Pakistan received disproportionately little investment. Political power was centralized in West Pakistan. Military leadership was overwhelmingly Punjabi and Pashtun. Civil administration treated Bengalis as culturally inferior and militarily unreliable and politically suspect. Language policy often revealed the depth of alienation. Imposition of Urdu as the sole national language in a country where majority spoke Bengali was not merely administrative arrogance, it was civilizational denial. The language movement of 1952 was the first sight that Pakistan's eastern wing was not a passive periphery, but a society with its own identity, history, and political will. By the late 1960s, Pakistan was no longer one nation divided by distance, it was two societies held together only by force. Chapter 2: The 1970 Election and the Fatal Choice. The 1970 general election was Pakistan's last chance at a peaceful survival. Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's Awami League won an absolute majority in the National Assembly, securing a democratic mandate to form the government. Constitutionally, legally, and morally, power should have been transferred to Dhaka. Instead, Pakistan military elite chose annihilation over accommodation. The refusal to hand over power was not driven by legal concerns, but by fear: fear of losing control, fear of decentralization, fear of Bengali dominance. The six-point program proposed by Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was not successionist, it was federal. Yet, even that degree of autonomy was unacceptable to a state whose identity was rooted in central military authority. On the night of 25th March 1971, Pakistan crossed the point of no return. Chapter 3: Operation Searchlight and the Collapse of Legitimacy. Operation Searchlight was not a strategic catastrophe disguised as counterinsurgency. The Pakistani military attempted to crush Bengali political resistance through terror, mass arrests, executions, and the destruction of intellectual centers, and the systematic violence against civilians. Universities, newspapers, student hostels, residential neighborhoods were targeted. The intention was clear: decapitate leadership, terrorize the population, and impose obedience through shock. Instead, the operation accomplished the opposite. By unleashing mass violence, Pakistan destroyed the last remnants of its legitimacy in East Pakistan. The conflict ceased to be a political one and became existential. Millions fled to India, creating a refugee crisis that internationalized the conflict. The Mukti Bahini emerged not as a fringe insurgency but as a mass resistance movement with deep civilian support. A state can survive rebellion, it cannot survive the total withdrawal of consent. Chapter 4: Strategic Isolation and the Indian Factor. India didn't create the Bangladesh War, it exploited Pakistan's self inflicting wounds. By mid 1971, India faced over 10 million Bengali refugees, destabilizing its eastern states. Diplomatic pressures ran out. India's strategy was deliberate and layered. First, it trained and armed the Mukti Bahini, transformed scattered resistance into a coordinated force. Second, it isolated Pakistan diplomatically, framing the crisis as a humanitarian one. Third, it waited. When Pakistan launched airstrikes on Indian airfields on 3rd December 1971, it handed India the legal and strategic justification for a full-scale war. The military balance in East Pakistan was never viable. The Pakistani forces were isolated, outnumbered, and logistically strained. India enjoyed interior lines, air superiority, naval dominance in the Bay of Bengal, and full cooperation from local forces. The Eastern Command in Dhaka was a garrison trapped in a hostile territory, fighting a population rather than an opposing state. Chapter 5: The Rapid Campaign and the Encirclement of Dhaka. The Indian campaign in the east was a textbook demonstration of maneuver warfare. Rather than engaging in a costly frontal assault, Indian forces bypassed strong points, seized communication hubs, destroyed bridges, and advanced rapidly towards Dhaka. Key towns fell with alarming speed: Jashore, Sylhet, Kumilla, Momansingh. Pakistani units were cut off, surrounded, or abandoned by fleeting commanders. The Mukti Bahini supporters' supply lines guided Indian columns and prevented regrouping. By mid-December, Dhaka was effectively encircled, airfields were neutralized, reinforcements were impossible, diplomatic intervention failed. The much-hyped arrival of the US Seventh Fleet changed nothing on the ground. At this stage, resistance no longer served military objectives. It would only have resulted in destruction of Dhaka and mass civilian casualties. Chapter 6: The Surrender at the Racecourse Ground. On December the 16th, 1971, Lieutenant General A.A.K. Niazi signed the instrument of surrender before Lieutenant General Jagdish Singh Arora. 93,000 Pakistani troops laid down their arms, the second large mass surrender in the since Second World War. The symbolism was total. The Pakistani state collapsed publicly in a full view of its enemies, in its former subjects and the world. This was not merely a defeat, it was a humiliation. Pakistan lost half its population, its eastern territory, and the ideological claim that religion alone could substitute for political justice. Bangladesh emerged not as a client state, but as a survival of systematic violence. Chapter 7: Consequences and Historical Meaning. For Bangladesh, independence came at an unimaginable cost. Millions dead, millions dead, infrastructure destroyed, and economy in ruins. Yet it also came with moral clarity. The legitimacy of self-determin- self-determination was beyond dispute. For India, the war reshaped South Asian geopolitics. It established India as the dominant regional power and demonstrated that decisive, limited war could achieve strategic objectives without global escalation. For Pakistan, 1971 remains an unhealed wound. The refusal to fully confront the causes of the defeat, military dominance over civilian authority, denial of ethnic plurality, and the use of force to suppress political demands continues to shape its instability. The fall of Dhaka was not the end of a war, it was the exposure of a lie. Conclusion: The fall of Dhaka stands as a case study in how states die, not from external invasions alone, but from internal decay. When power divorces itself from consent, when identity is enforced rather than negotiated, and when violence replaces politics, collapse becomes inevitable. On June 16, 1971, an army surrendered, but long before that a state had already forfeited the right to rule. Bangladesh was born not because Pakistan lost a war, but because it was the moral, political, and strategic foundations of sovereignty itself.